you come to a result where you avoid the creation of monocultures, and this again can result in a finding of a niche market for producers that engage in these kind of technical standards. So there is actually a way of integrating these environmental and traditional knowledge considerations in the entire value chain of a geographic indication or a certification mark. When you define the territory, when you codify the knowledge and the practice in the product specifications, the product specifications can also define what kind of traditional knowledge should be used in the production methods. The specifications can refer to, let's say, traditional or recyclable materials as the packaging and labeling that should be used. And finally, of course, as far as marketing and distribution is concerned, the specification can provide a specific link, an obligation to link the product to a certain origin and a certain territory or certain communities. That is easily said, but it's actually quite hard to do because it requires strong producer associations. The producer associations, they are there to define the standards of a distinctive sign and to harmonize the production processes. For example, on the treatment of the raw material, on the designation of the territory, but then also in terms of quality and verification controls and joint labeling and marketing strategies. This is actually quite a challenge in developing countries because developing countries have an informal sector of production and they lack, or they often lack cooperative governance structures. And that does not make it an easy task to have a successful distinctive sign development in a developing country context. We will hear more about that in the other presentations. Let me come to my almost last slide, which discusses a specific case. Can we use distinctive signs to address in a defensive way misappropriation of traditional knowledge or genetic resources? You know that I'm referring to the case where certain economic actors seek patents on the results of R&D processes and results on certain traditional knowledge and genetic resources without the authorization from the provider communities. An example is the attempt to patent forms of quinoa in certain countries. Now, of course, we need to say that distinctive signs cannot directly prevent this kind of misappropriation, because what distinctive signs protect is not the knowledge per se, the content, but it is really the use of the sign. However, if you codify the traditional knowledge or the genetic resources in a trademark or GI specification, that should have an impact on prior art analysis in the context of a patent application. So there is a certain way of using distinctive signs to prevent this kind of misappropriation in an indirect manner. More of all of this, let me see if I can get to my last slide. Yeah, more of all of this is provided in our publication on the Nagoya Protocol and intellectual property implications. We have a large chapter that deals with distinctive signs and the relationship between distinctive signs and biodiversity. And I'm happy to address any further questions you might have on this. This handbook is actually the basis of our technical cooperation with many developing countries. So this is as far as I would like to go. And without much further ado, I would now like to stop sharing my screen and introduce to the audience Ms. Natalia Dulkowska for the next presentation. Natalia is an intellectual property lawyer. She's a member of the INTA Harmonization and Trademark Law and Practice Committee. And Natalia will be talking about the significance of the reputation of distinctive trademarks for inclusive and sustainable economic development. Natalia, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I wanted to thank you for having me and thank all of you for being here. And I'm grateful I can present you the profile of my research. I am an IP and IT lawyer and a PhD candidate in the field of European Union intellectual property law. especially trademark law, as well as member of INTA. And my PhD thesis that I'm working on is an attempt to make a systematic analysis of the scope of reputable and well-known trademark extended protection in European Union and in United States jurisdictions, with a mention of the functions of trademark and the purpose of the law protecting trademarks. I just wanted to point out that the topic of trademark reputation is really wide, and I decided to make some general introduction to classic trademark law provisions and the most important assumptions. So maybe I'll try to share my screen. Okay, hope it's okay. So intellectual property plays a vital role in the broadly defined industrial and social matters and has a profound effect on the economic development and growth. So this presentation aims to illustrate the opportunities that may arise for developing country producers when using distinctive signs which are more prone to obtain their reputation, and the role of the trademark with reputation in the process of conquering new markets. As an efficient trademark protection model undoubtedly ranks among the most important aspects of effective operation in the market, and at the end of the day, encourages creativity and innovation through the whole economy. The issues involved in analyzing the role of intellectual property rights in promoting economic development and growth are extremely complex, and many of the relevant concepts are difficult to measure. Expanding intellectual property regimes also have numerous, often contradictory impacts on a nation's development. Despite this complexities, a growing body of research suggests that stronger intellectual property rights, if properly structured, can increase economic growth and encourage technological development. Developing nations face an important challenge reconciling intellectual property protection with the global push for more open, pro-competitive trade. Also, regarding contribution of intellectual property rights to the European Union economy and to individual firms, intellectual property Office Observatory study finds that more than 40% of total economic activity is generated by intellectual property rights, mostly intensive intellectual property rights industries, and approximately 40% of all employment in the European Union, what is 80 million jobs, stems from such industries that have a higher than average use of intellectual property rights. Therefore, the system's sustainability is an urgent problem, and innovation policies, together with environmental laws, play a key role in addressing many global environmental and economic issues. So intellectual property rights as temporary privileges over the products of intellectual property activity determine who controls information and technology. Intellectual property rules fundamentally affect the quality and availability of innovative ideas, also in developing countries, and therefore are extremely important in achieving sustainable development, ensuring human health, and protecting the development of economy and protection of an environment. Speaking to the point, what is trademark? as 400 years ago, trademark had only two functions: to assign goods to the trademark owner or to demonstrate the goods' origin. And to achieve the first function, trademarks were merely affixed to the goods, so the owner could distinguish them from the other goods and claim an ownership over them in the event of shipwreck piracy. This mark did not indicate the source of production of the mark, but instead the merchants who sell the products. Second, in some areas, trademarks were mandatory for determining the producer or the craftsman of the goods, and in case of defects of the products, to trace him for punitive purposes. They would also serve to prevent counterfeiting of foreign goods, and if it was against the monopoly of the guild, for example. And so what is the trademark now? Now trademarks are often among the most important and valuable assets of a business. And the distinctive trademarks allows a business to build public goodwill and brand reputation in the goods or services it sells. Generally speaking, a trademark is any word, name, symbol, or device, or a combination thereof that identifies and distinguishes the source of the goods of one party from those of others, or any other recognizable thing that serves to indicate a particular source, good, or service. And nowadays, trademark's function is much more expensive. It is no longer limited to the function of indicating a source of goods and services, as it communicates the price, the quality to the customer, and it also protects the goodwill of the customers of this mark and the investment made by its proprietor. So why are the trademarks important? Trademarks play an essential role in protecting consumers and in promoting global economic growth. Also enable consumers to make quick, confident decisions, promote freedoms of choice, and encourage vibrant competition for the benefit of consumers, workers, brand owners, and generally society at large. When talking about trademarks in developing countries, trademarks indicate the inherent quality or other distinguishing features of products. A strong trademark protection can lower consumer costs of searching for preferred quality characteristics. With weak trademark protection, firms in developing countries might not be willing to provide high quality products. And with strong trademark protection, firms have an incentive to maintain or improve quality over time in order not to erode the value of the trademarks. By solving the vertical model, we show that strengthened trademark protection in developing countries may induce domestic firms to become exporters and raise the quality of products on the export market. And also the welfare analyses show that strengthened trademark protection in developing countries benefits customers and firms producing high quality products, but harms firms producing counterfeits and uniform customers. So what makes trademarks distinctive, and what doesn't matter? First, what is trademark strength and why is it important? So the nature of a mark, particularly its relative strength or weakness, will have a direct bearing on its performance in the market and the scope of legal protection to which the mark is entitled. A mark that is highly distinctive functions as a strong mark, identifying the owner as the source of the covered products or services. So when a mark is scarcely distinctive and it might already be used by others or in connection with different products or services, at the same time, the mark is considered weak. In general, the stronger a mark is, the easier it is for the mark to be registered and protected from unauthorized use by others. So the trademarks are only protectable if they are considered distinctive. And the purpose of a trademark is to identify a consistent source for example, a person or a company, to the consumer. In order for a trademark to do its job, it must be distinctive to the consumer. So a trademark can be inherently distinctive, or it can acquire distinctiveness through long and exclusive use of the trademark by the trademark owner. And when we talk about distinctiveness, generally speaking, there is a spectrum ranging from very distinctive to totally undistinctive. And trademarks which are arbitrary or fanciful are considered to be the most distinctive. So distinctivity is a first step to gain a reputation. And when the trademark is arbitrary or fanciful, especially when it's fancifully so made up of words, is the most distinctive and the most prone to gain the reputation. So a mark is reputable or famous when it's widely recognized by the general consuming public as a destination of the goods or services of the mark's owner. And the court, generally speaking, consider the factors as the duration, the extent, the geographical reach of advertising of the trademark, the amount, the volume of geographic extent of the sales of goods, the extent of actual recognition of the mark at the end of the day, and what is also important, whether the mark was registered. Coming to conclusion, an effective system for the international protection of intellectual property helps producers obtain a fair return on their conscious investment and effort, often over several generations, in building the reputation of traditional origin-based products. Because of the collective dimensions of these intellectual property rights and the fact that they often give value to traditional and emblematic products of a particular region, the protection of appellations of origin and geographical indications, and also at the end of the day, trademarks, has the potential to enhance the reputation of the region in which they originate. Such protection also contributes to a region's economic and social development by producing spillover effects, such as the creation of new employment opportunities, for example, local tourism. And by securing protection internationally, the intellectual property protection systems contribute to the promotion of inclusive and sustainable development, productive employment, and decent work for all by achieving higher levels of economic productivity, including through a focus on value added and labor-intensive sectors, as well as the promotion of local culture and local production. Yeah, and that's it. In case of any question, I'm open to go ahead. Thank you very much.
Natalia, thanks so much, for this very good presentation. And now we are going to move to our first case study. I believe our next speaker is Charlene. Charlene is a PhD candidate from University of Cape Town. She will share with us, a few insights, on producer perception on branding for Chipinji coffee in Zimbabwe, right? Please go ahead. I believe you're on mute now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Ted. Thanks also to Christoph for organizing this together with Ted. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. So this beautiful background that you see, that's the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe. That's the place where I went to do my case study. So it's a beautiful area with rolling hills, beautiful sights. I would encourage everybody, once all this is over, you should visit. Please, you should visit this place. So I'm just going to discuss producer perspectives on branding for Chipinge coffee. And just an outline. I will begin with a bit of an introduction to coffee production in Zimbabwe, and then the legal framework for brand protection, and then the perspectives of the growers, and then finally some conclusions and recommendations. So coffee production in Zimbabwe began probably in the late 1890s. And over the years, there's been an uptake normally from commercial farmers. So the biggest production, I would say, was in the late 1990s, the peak between 1996 and 2000, when we're averaging around 11,000 tons in terms of production, and about 8,000 tons in terms of exports. And then over the last, say 10 or so years, we had the land resettlement scheme in Zimbabwe, with so many commercial farms being subdivided and land being given to small-scale producers. And they've been taken up to producing coffee in large numbers. I would say about 3,000 coffee farmers are in the Eastern Highlands, with land ranging from 0.5 hectares to about 10 or 11 hectares. The peak of production from small-scale farmers was in 2018 at around 32 tons. So coffee is produced in the Eastern Highlands. That's the area that's highlighted in green on that map. It's a fairly large area and very climatically suitable for coffee production. And it's mainly concentrated in 4 districts. That's Chipinge, Chimanimani, Mutare, and Mutasa. So what I'll be sharing with you is my findings from speaking to farmers in Mutare district in an area called Vumba. So that's just a picture from a nursery at one of the farms. So Zimbabwe produces Arabica coffee, wet processed Arabica coffee, and the crucial steps probably begin from harvesting to the time when the coffee gets to the coffee mills. The pulping process involves removing the skin to expose the coffee bean, putting it in water for 38 hours for fermentation, washing it, drying it in the sun, and then storaging. It's a fairly short value chain when you compare to other coffee producing regions on the continent. I think you'd have 2 or 3 main key players in each of the stages. Just to mention something else, around cultivation of coffee, there's some government interest in terms of ADA, which is a government parastatal that owns a coffee estate in Rusitu Valley. Besides that, cultivation is mostly small-scale farmers and very few commercial farmers. In terms of processing, that is hulling the coffee, grading it, and sorting it, it is done mostly by Zimbabwe Coffee Mills. Now that is a company that was established by farmers in 1993, and it is involved in processing and marketing of the coffee. Most of the coffee that the country produces is exported, about 90%. So the roasting and the retailing is done in destination markets, mostly in South Africa, in the EU, and in the US. So coffee is a big foreign currency in Zimbabwe. And I will just briefly highlight the legal framework. We have trademarks and a sui generis GI law. And under trademarks, it's in terms of the act and also in terms of the common law. With common law, it's the rules of unlawful competition and passing off. And trademark serves the same interest, the same purpose of indicating commercial origin and distinguishing. Certification mark also, it's in respect of origin or quality of the product. And normally this is certified by a competent entity. it offers the same rights as you'd have with a trademark. Collective mark, also the same, but specifically for associations, that's groups of producers. There's a fairly new provision that came into the Act in 2001. Before then, we didn't have this in our Trademark Act. Also the same rules as you'd have and the same rights as you'd have under trademark. The GI law was enacted in 2001, and the reputation, the quality of a product that's attributable to the geographical origin is what it serves to distinguish. And it closely mirrors what you have with the TRIPS agreement. Now, this is just a picture of the farmers that I spoke to, just some of them. And just an anecdote, the farmer that you see, the old man, is 90 years old. He has a place that's 5 hectares under coffee and was planning to increase to 8 hectares. That's how ambitious these coffee farmers are. And then my discussion with the farmers, I think initially I had to first explain what a trademark is, what a GI is, just to be able to have an understanding and proceed from that point. Only 30% knew what a trademark or a GI was and could rightly identify, which is such a shame, I think, because when you look at what the AU strategy is around GIs, it's around rural development, around sustainable development. So you'd expect some kind of awareness raising around the people who are supposed to benefit from some of these schemes that are being set up. But interestingly though, the farmers were quite aware of how to use these schemes. Like their focus was on marketing. The idea that you use the mark to distinguish and to identify, and you use the mark to attract new customers and to use the mark to get into new markets. So the focus was mostly around marketing, which I think is quite interesting because we tend to think that when we use a trademark or a GI, sometimes it's mostly for the consumers, but sometimes it's also for the farmers to have a sense of awareness of what their product is performing like on markets. The farmers were also quite willing to support a strategy that enables all of them to participate and benefit. So that's more of a collective right, more of what you'd see under a GI scheme or a certification scheme, and not so much under a trademark. But however, they were also lamenting the lack of a government policy on coffee. I mean, what we have in Zimbabwe is that there's government policy around agri-products that bring a lot of foreign currency into the country. For instance, tobacco and cotton. There is nothing yet on coffee in the country. And the farmers were also acutely aware of the need to increase production before pursuing a branding strategy of any sort. And they mentioned specifically what you have with coffees from Ethiopia, with coffees from Rwanda, with coffees from Burundi. Those are known because they are quite distinguishing, and they are also producing very large volumes. I mean, Ethiopia is probably the biggest on the continent. Now, just some available options from my reflections with all that I acquired with the farmers. A trademark would be easier because it simply identifies commercial origin. But geographical names cannot be registered as trademarks in terms of the Act. Though I think this provision is not as strictly enforced, we have quite a few products that are registered trademarks that identify places. For instance, Tanganda tea, which is a tea from a place called Tanganda, which is also in the Eastern Highlands of the country. We have Kesho Valley beans, which comes from a place called Kesho Valley. We have Mazoe Orange Crush, which is made from oranges that come from a place called Mazoe. So maybe this is not as strictly applied, or maybe when you couple it with another word, they can then consider registration as trademarks. Certification mark is probably also quite easier because of the aspect of collective use, since the farmers indicated a willingness to have something that they can all benefit from and participate in. And they already have an authority that certifies the quality of their coffee. That's the Zimbabwe Coffee Mills. And then a GI. I would say a GI is probably the most difficult. There's a lot of literature around the challenges for countries in implementing a GI system. There is a lot to consider. around collective organization, specification, traceability. But I'll just focus in on one aspect that I think stood out for me in this fieldwork. Whereas the farmers are organized around collectives and associations, growers associations, there is no one single formal body that brings them all together. And that's a challenge, because once you don't have collective organization, it's hard to set the specifications of how the product is produced, from harvesting, from washing, from fermenting, drying, even storaging that coffee. So you'd want something that leverages all the producers to participate in a process that they can have a buy-in to. So the lack of a collective organization is probably one of the main limitations to a GI scheme for coffee from Zimbabwe. And then in conclusion, just some recommendations. I think one of the most important things is developing a coffee policy. I know Zimbabwe Coffee Mills has made some efforts. They've canvassed input from small-scale farmers. They've spoken to people along the value chain. They've also had input from the Coffee Research Institute around a strategy document for Chipinge coffee. But so far, there is nothing yet, but we are hopeful that the Ministry of Agriculture will take this forward and push it probably in the next few years, hopefully. The other thing is to strengthen associations of growers, which will be crucial and very key, no matter what strategy they adopt, because there need to be some form of coherence and some way to align with how they are going to produce the coffee. And then also the linkages in the value chain. And I would say for me, in the short term, a certification mark would be much better, a better option in terms of feasibility. You already have the Zimbabwe Coffee Mills, which is playing a very central role in the value chain as the aggregator, as the secondary processor, and as the marketer of Chipinge coffee. They're already playing as a role in quality assurance. So I would think that a certification mark would be better for Chipinge coffee. So yeah, that will be all. Thank you. And I look forward to questions and comments. Thanks, Tad.
Thanks a lot, Charlene, for this very insightful presentation. Especially what I found interesting is your analysis of what type of distinctive sign could best serve the interests of the producers in that area. Very interesting. Thanks. I think we shall have plenty of time to discuss this. May I now introduce to all of you Ms. Sanaz Javadi Farazadi. Sanaz is intellectual property and trade lawyer and international consultant. And Sanaz will be presenting about the socioeconomics of branding in enhancing ecotourism, a comparative analysis of the ASEAN region. Sanaz, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot to Christophe and Tad for arranging and the invitation. As highlighted by Christophe, I'm gonna address some practical perspective of distinctive marks, more specifically GIs. So I'm gonna share my screen with you. So, as addressed by Christophe and Charlene, geographical indications are specific signs for local communities' development, which link a product to a particular region. It could be agricultural products or handicrafts or even industrial products, and indicate the qualities and reputation which is associated with certain geographical region. And of course, a geographical indication implies the products that the production is related to a specific soil, climate, and people skills and traditional knowledge in certain region. Geographical indication also relates to the major component of the quality management. And also it's a way of access to the niche markets for local producers and indigenous people. And in comparison with the trademark, geographical indication is always and permanently protectable. Geographical indications are basically linked with the livelihood of the people in local communities in Southeast Asia. And based on my practical experiences with WIPO, ITC, regional IP offices, and local stakeholders, I've picked 2 countries. Cambodia, which is basically the first country which joined the Geneva Act to Lisbon Agreement in 2018. And also South Korea as a very successful story of branding in East Asia. So of course, South Korea is not from ASEAN region, but of course, as a successful example, I decided to pick South Korea, which is also the donor of many branding projects, especially for WIPO and some other international organizations. So the geographical indication in Southeast Asia or South Asia are linked to the products which are either agriculture, fisheries, crafts, artisanal works, and provides, as I indicated, provides livelihood to the large section of least developed areas. And of course, most of the Asian countries have the access of diverse agriculture products, which are based on the traditional knowledge of indigenous people. So why GIs matter? As highlighted by Christoph previously, GIs contribute to the reorientation toward quality as opposed to the quantity, which is basically like managing the quality of the respective products rather than being focused all the time on the volume and the quantity of the products for having more sales volume in local, regional, and international markets. And it provides producers with a higher income in return for the genuine effort they put for improving the quality so that they can achieve to the niche markets with premium prices. And it also provides consumers with sufficient information on the product and the quality that the product is guaranteeing in the market. And of course, we've talked a lot, and you can find lots of literature on direct economic aspects of geographical indication for higher income, for access to the markets, to international markets, and for having the higher quality of the products, which is like the case of today's world with the COVID situation, the access of the more high quality products and health-oriented products. But of course, we rarely address the indirect impacts of geographical indication in developing majorly and least developed countries, which is like rural development, tourism, and some other areas. So geographical indication also manage the value chain and also like can contribute to better distribution of the business revenue to the main producers, not the traders or dealers or distributors in the value chain. So GI helps the value chain so that the major income, the major business revenue and the margins could somehow goes to the main actors of the value chain, which are the farmers and the first producers. And of course, because of the rural development and developing the region in terms of economy, it can prevent the migration to urban areas so that the producers remain in the region and they are willing to continue their businesses in agriculture and handicraft sectors so that they can gain more business revenue rather than moving and migrating to industrial cities. And of course, it can also add value to the land of origin when the products are being produced, and of course, encouraging the diversification of the products so that you can have different and diverse products under the same agriculture product to be protected under same GI system. And of course, it preserved biodiversity, traditional knowledge, and natural resources. And of course, as I highlighted, the positive impact on rural and tourism development. The sustainable advantages of geographical indication for local communities, which is basically economic, social, and environmental. Economic is highlighted already for the price, having the access to the higher and premium prices in the market, and also the spillover effect of the GI products to the other non-GI product in the region, and also to the other sectors like tourism. And of course, GI also can contribute to the social sustainability, like social inclusion of women entrepreneurs and women producers in the region, which are basically like in, for example, the case of Cambodia or ASEAN region, many of the producers are women. And of course, they're active in the sector, so they really need to be more involved and have better protection so that they can have better access to the market. And again, environmental sustainability and food security to have a better, because of the quality management and the certification process during the GI system, it can amount to more sustainable agriculture and production of the agriculture products. So what is the role of GI in sustainable travel or ecotourism? Actually, the definition, I don't know how much you know about the definition of ecotourism, but based on the definition of the International Ecotourism Society, ecotourism relates to the responsible travel to natural areas that conserve the environment and improve the well-being of local people. So GI system can also share some basic principles with the idea behind the sustainable travel or ecotourism, because both build environment and cultural awareness and respect for the visitors and for the tourists. It can provide positive experiences for the tourists in the region that they are visiting. It can generate financial benefits, not even like only through the direct sale of the product in the market, but of course through consumption or purchases of the relevant GI products in the touristic region, and development of the hospitality services and tourism services such as hotels, resorts, restaurants, cafes, field trip, and etc. So based on the experience that I had in 2018 in Cambodia, in many ASEAN countries, they have developed an initiative which is called One Village, One Product. And based on that, the Cambodian government intended to promote rural economic growth and improving the living standard of the people through improvement of local products. And as I highlighted before, preventing urban job hunting and resource producing product with export potentials based on the OVOP initiative, which is related to the protection of each area specific products under the GI system, which is actually now around like 10 years passing by this initiative of having the first GI in Cambodia. Cambodian government decided to protect two agriculture products, pepper and sugar. And the pepper, which is Kampot pepper, located in the Kampot and Kep provinces, was registered together with the palm sugar by Ministry of Commerce of Cambodia in 2010, which is basically the first GI registered in the country and recognized by WTO in the same year. And afterwards, it was registered in Vietnam and Thailand, and then registered in EU in 2016. So Cambodia is a very successful example of a least developed country in terms of GI, and of course, promotion of the area, which I had the field visit 2 years ago. So we could get the information and the process that and the procedure that the farmers and the local producers passed through years and years with the help of the Kampot Pepper Promotion Association to promote the sale and marketing of the pepper in the local, regional, and international markets. So some of the positive aspects of the GI that we witnessed in the region, and we interviewed, we talked with the farmers, with the Kampot Pepper Association, and with the local consultant, was the increase of the small scale farmers' income, which amounted to like to 70% of the export volume of the country. and the rest of the income would be related to the tourism and local consumption of the Kampot pepper. And of course, it created direct jobs for selling the product itself and indirect benefits like packaging, hospitality, and tourism, and which amounted to the more recognition of the GI product, which is Kampot pepper, by consumers in ASEAN region and in EU. And of course, the producers, the farmers are following the sustainable agriculture production methods in order to have more organic products, using less pesticides, and having more sustainable agriculture. Kampot province is located between mountain and sea, and as I mentioned, is majorly famous for the quality of the pepper, and afterwards for the salt and the local fruits. And of course, the special climate and soil specification of the region has caused the special quality of the pepper, which is really unique and is very sought for the, like the worldwide usage. And of course, it promoted tourism activities in the region, like the discovering tools, cooking classes, caving, climbing, and etc. And one of the very interesting like experiences that we had, which you can see in the picture, is the testing the local cuisine, which is basically the major ingredients is the pepper, Kampot pepper. And the special taste of the Kampot pepper and the promotion of the sustainable gastronomy tourism in the country has been highlighted in, like many tourism and gastronomy related guides like Lonely Planet. And of course, the idea behind the protection of the Kampot pepper has been always protection and providing sustainability to local food as a part of traditional life and culture of the local people in Kampot region. But of course, in spite of having the GI system around 10 years in place, there are still some challenges, and we've been discussing this with the local consultant within last few weeks, especially due to the two major reasons, which one is climate change and the second one is COVID-19, which of course affected the sales volume in the region. And even before that, oversupply of the crop in spite of the stable market demand has been always the problem, and because producers are always tending to produce more crop in spite of the fact that the demand in the regional and international market is almost the same. And in spite of having the GI system in place and GI protection, you can still find a lot of counterfeiting goods in Siem Reap region, which is the major touristic, historical touristic area in Cambodia. And you can still witness the informal export to Thailand and Vietnam without having the GI certification in place and the authorization from the government. And of course, producers are still suffering from the poor access to innovation and technical skills for the better production of their products. As I highlighted, the climate change negative impact on the characteristic and the specification of the product, and dependence of the local producers on foreign markets such as US and EU, which is impacted by COVID. And of course, local tourism sector, which accounts for 30% of the country income, is unfortunately affected by COVID because the Cambodian government has restricted the entrance of the tourists into the region. So the other challenges, the major challenge which still remains is that the local producers lack enough bargaining power for negotiating the prices in the value chain. And investment decisions are majorly determined by global market perspective and pandemic challenges for the time being. And they don't have so much power in addressing the income and the price that they intend to sell their products. So in spite of the challenges, some positive changes are on the way, which is addressed by KPPA, Compote Pepper Promotion Association. Hopefully since June last month, the association members have started to order the commodity, I mean the compote pepper again, of course in small quantities based on the current market demand. And from another hand, because EU is one of the major consumers of compote pepper, confinement has somehow initiated the consumers to look for more healthy or more high quality products and to have fine food at home. So the association is hoping that this would somehow impact the order volume by the European purchasers, basically. Another successful example, which I have not witnessed and I didn't have the chance to visit the region yet, is South Korea. And I just could have information based on the information that I got from the colleagues that are basically in South Korea now doing their branding researches, and also like regional IP offices. So one of the major GI products in South Korea is the Boseong tea, which is related to Boseong County, the largest tea plantation and tourist farm in South Korea. As part of the TRIPS agreement obligations, South Korean government enacted the Act on Geographical Indication Protection named Agriculture Product Quality Control Act in 1999. And Boseong green tea was basically the first product officially registered as GI in 2002, and also at the same time as the certification mark. Geographical indication are considered as a very efficient method for place marketing in South Korea, together with the product marketing. And tourism linked to green tea is one of the largest sources of income for the government. And based on the GI system development for the green tea in the region, there are many touristic initiatives launched by the government, which is held every May in the region, like Green Tea Festival and Light Festival during the night to represent the tea culture in the country. South Korean government also launched the green tea promotion strategy based on the protected GI to promote the product image and somehow have the positive impact compared to the other competitors in the region like Japanese tea, and to double the production and increase the prices up to 90%. And of course, based on these promotion strategies, after a few years, the number of the tourists to the region tripled. The positive impacts of GI protection for the green tea in South Korea has been threefolded. The positive impact on the method of cultivation, volume of the cultivation, processing methods, and tourism, as mentioned, like the festivals, the tea resorts, tea tours, tea museum, and diversification of the products and producing the other diverse products out of tea, like cosmetics, medicinal products, and etc. South Korean government initiated a survey in 2004 to evaluate the most favorable touristic area in the country. And of course, it's the Boseong Tea region is the major and most favorable touristic place among Koreans. So South Korea, as I mentioned, is the very successful story for a developed country in East Asia, which I'm currently using this example for the projects that I'm doing for Iranian stakeholders and some other stakeholders in Middle East and Asia. And based on my researches that I started from last year is like I'm also working on the impact of geographical indication, positive impact of the geographical indication on the climate change. And also I'm going to be more and more focused on indirect impacts of geographical indications such as tourism sector. So geographical indication important role, as I highlighted, is not only for differentiation of the product in the market, it also can contribute to differentiation and reputation of a certain place in the region. So the geographical indication role is twofold for product marketing and also for place marketing. GI can be considered as a very successful branding tool, especially for agriculture sector in developing and least developed countries in Asia, which really transfer the clear, specific, credible message and differentiate the quality of the product. In order to achieve the socio-economic impact of GI, the comprehensive engagement of public and private stakeholders required, which is somehow a problematic issue in Southeast Asia due to the lack of awareness of the local stakeholders and the benefit of GI system. And of course, trade and tourism, supply chain disruption, and weakening domestic consumption based on COVID situation, I believe that can be only compensated by GI system. So this is all. I would be at your disposal if you have any further questions. But of course, addressing all aspects of GI is really huge that I cannot highlight all of them in one single session.
Thanks so much, Sanaz, and also to Charlene. We started our journey, with with Natalia, and then we flew to Zimbabwe, and now, you took us to Southeast Asia. So what a wonderful journey. So before I give the floor before we open the floor to question, and also I just have a quick question to Charlene, based on the presentation. So Charlene, you mentioned that only 30% of farmers knew what was a trademark and GI. So from your experience, how could we ensure that, then, the farmers, have, a bigger, appropriation, of IP tools. So not only, of course, trademark and GIs, but, to make sure that, there is more, commercialization of, of the local brand. So please, guide us a bit, on that one. Thanks, Charlene.
Okay, thanks, Ted. I think what is missing is a lack of awareness. I think this is quite prominent in most developing countries, where you find that the people who are intended to be the beneficiaries of some of these schemes have no idea what these IP tools are. So it's about raising awareness. It's about trying to get them to know about these tools. And there are many players in the value chain. For instance, in Chipinge Coffee, there are many players in the value chain who could be able to assist in this regard. Beginning with the IP office in Zimbabwe, I think they can play a more prominent role in taking IP to the people I have noticed that there are a number of conferences that they do hold around patenting and around trademark. That is always in the city. There is never that effort to make that available, that knowledge available to people who are far removed from the capital city. If you can take that conference to such areas, Mutare is a big city. They can take conferences to that area. There are other cities, Gweru, Blawayo, the other places where they can go and have such kind of sessions or seminars or workshops, and to be able to let people be aware of IP issues. The other avenue is that they can take advantage of farmers' cooperatives. Farmers get together every so often to discuss best practices. If you find that when farmers are having such kind of discussions, you can have an IP expert go in there from the IP office, from even other law firms or any other lawyers interested, or anybody who knows about IP in any way, not necessarily lawyers, anybody can know about IP. So if somebody who knows about IP can be present in those spaces, give yourself even just 15 minutes to explain some of these things, they can easily understand. They are very literate people, they can understand when you explain these things to them. So that way you get them involved. And then with Chipping a Coffee, you have players who support, you have development partners that come in, SNV from Netherlands, you have with World Vision, you have the UK's division, DFID, you have also TechnoServe, which is working with Nespresso, bringing training to those farmers. Those also can be key players in conscientizing farmers about some of these tools. So there are different ways you can come across, you can attack this to bring that awareness to the farmers.
Thanks so much, Charlene. Christophe, please go ahead.
Thanks, Tad. I would like to basically see if there are any participants that have any questions or comments. I see that there is a comment in the chat, but are there also, is there someone that would like from the audience to ask a question now? All right, as far as I understand this technology, I don't see any raised hands.
So you had a question, on the Nagoya Protocol. Perhaps you would like to tackle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's an interesting question on how could the structure of the Nagoya Protocol be used to rethink the global supply and value chains, especially in regard to benefit sharing. Thanks for the question. I think definitely it can. The question is whether this can happen in our specific context of distinctive signs, because I think when we talk about patents, we talk about the using of the knowledge as such, and the benefit sharing obligations under the Nagoya Protocol are triggered when it's about R&D, research and development activities. I think in the area of trademarks, when you use a distinctive sign, I don't really see it so much related to specific R&D activities. So I don't think that in our specific context of distinctive signs, we can really create a very intense link to benefit sharing, But I mean, in general, I would say that the Nagoya Protocol with the access and benefit sharing obligations is an important step towards changing value chains. But this relates more to the area of patents. As you know, Switzerland, for example, is a country that has a disclosure of origin obligation in its patent law. So basically someone that wants to apply for a patent on something that is related to traditional knowledge or genetic resources has to declare where it's from when you want to patent this in Switzerland. But that goes a little bit out of the context of our current discussion. But so thanks for that question. But what I'm actually interested in is when I look at our discussion that we're having, and I see the examples from Zimbabwe on the one hand, and the examples from Southeast Asia on the other hand, and there seemed to be a clear recommendation, Charlene, on your side, to more go up for the trademark system, basically the certification mark option. Whereas Sanaz, I think you highlighted that the sui generis type GI can be really successful or has been very successful in Southeast Asia. My question is, how can we explain that difference? Is it the strength of the producer associations? Is this really what it is? I have the impression that it's all tied to these producer associations. Do you already have established strong cooperatives, or are we in a situation where these have to be formed? That I think is really important for people like us when we advise countries, because of course we need to understand what is the situation on the ground and how do we advise the policymakers accordingly. So is producer associations really something that is the main reason for this distinction? Over to you. Thank you.
I respond first or Charlie respond?
Whatever, I mean.
Okay, for the case of Cambodia, you know, like the background of the case goes back to the time that the French Development Agency somehow donated this GI project in Cambodia, and the focus of the French government was on the empowering of producers association, as I mentioned, KPPA, the Compost Pepper Promotion Association. The major focus was on empowering local producers in terms of having an association and a strong cooperatives so that they can manage the whole GI value chain themselves, so that they can have the managing power to identify everything from pricing perspective, identification of the relevant markets, packaging, and even like the indirect impact, economic impact on tourism and other sectors. So for the Compost Pepper, the case was really the promotion association, which is still super active in promoting and preserving the already registered GI in the country. So I think that, as Charlie mentioned, the major problem in developing and least developed countries, I've been witnessing and investigating almost, I don't know, 6-7 countries by now. In all of them, there are two major problems: lack of partnership between government and private sector, and lack of coordination among local producers. So not even the producers, all actors within the value chain, from producers, packaging companies, distributors, marketing agencies, and etc. So for the case of Cambodia, I think GI, depending on the development stage of each country, political, economic, and social context of each country, you can choose. And of course, based on the legal system, which is more relevant, like is it GI or certification mark or collective mark, or you can go ahead with your individual trademarks. And for the case of South Korea, you saw that they chose both GI together with the certification mark. So it really depends on each country environment, I think, to define the relevant policies.
Thanks a lot, Sanaz. Charlene, any views from your side on this comparative question?
Okay, yeah, I think I largely agree with what Sanaz has said. And I think what we need to keep in mind is that developing countries are not the same. It's different contexts. Each of them is unique. So what might work in a certain country might not work in another country or in another context. So having that kind of background in mind, I think is also quite important. And there are many limitations. So each country is weighing its options. Which system best serves your purpose, maybe in the short term and also in the long term. So when I think of certification mark, I think of it in the short term. This is what we can do in the short term. But then going forward, a GI could also work for Chipinge coffee. It is quite distinctive in terms of quality, in terms of the properties, the physical properties. The process of production is quite distinctive. So it could also qualify for a GI. But in the short term, what seems probably more feasible is a certification mark. Now, the challenge with the GI, like also Sanaz has said, cooperatives or having groups work together, it requires a lot of cooperatives from the farmers or producers. Cooperation is very important because you need to define the specification, you need to define the geographical delimitation, you need to define the process of harvesting, growing, or packaging. All of that has to be identified. So these are quite big challenges for people who are trying to just get a leverage or a step into the market. So having all that to consider, a GI might be a lot of work. It requires a lot of resources. If I can remember correctly, the case of Ethiopian coffee, they had to pursue a trademark because the whole idea of a GI was quite too difficult to scale in terms of the numbers of producers, in terms of the quantity of the coffee that comes from the country. and all the small other elements that come with a GI. So it is quite a good option, but it's difficult. So you adopt something that you think would work in the short term and then develop it further. And I think for developing countries, these are very real challenges. So it requires a lot of consideration, weighing of options, what would be best, what would be better in the short term, and then also in the long term.
Thanks a lot, Charlie, and quite clear what you said.
Basically, it's kind of, you know, learning by doing and being a bit more practical and proactive. Yeah,
and I would like to add that the local stakeholders suffer from lack of awareness in terms of GI in comparison with trademark system. This is the reality. When you talk about the collective nature of the GI to the local stakeholders, in most cases, they don't like it. They really want to have their own market power. So I think the more awareness raising is required, depending on each country context.
This is an interesting comment, Sana. So this would be a cultural difference, maybe. When you look at European countries, people are very used to having GIs and collective associations, right? So I think culture plays a big role there.
Yeah. I think we cannot address all aspects of distinctive marks in one single webinar, actually. So.
No, this was not the purpose. That's right.
Yeah.
Maybe one more strategic question. We had the interesting case where we also promote ecotourism. So we don't just promote the use of a sign or one product, but on top of it, as a third kind of on the third level comes the tourism. Is this something that countries should aim at, or should countries first aim at just, you know, marketing and promoting the sign and the product as such, and then once that is done, as a next step, we go to the tourism? Or I think everything together could be a bit ambitious. What is your view on this?
I think based on the experience for the Cambodian case, as I highlighted, I was only the witness. I had only this experience sharing of what happened in Cambodia. But for example, Iran is not the subject of today's webinar, but for example, for the case of Iran, the major focus is on the efficient establishment of the GI system itself in the first place, then shifting to because as I mentioned, GI system has spillover effects, and tourism is related to the spillover effects inherent in the GI system. So for the case of Iran, there is some sort of like a national steering committee which is majorly focused on the promotion of export, and one part of it is GI. And as a part of GI, there are different coordination, which is not happening so efficiently yet, but between different ministries, like Ministry of Agriculture, together with the Cultural Development Organization, Ministry of Culture and Tourism Organization, and some other public stakeholders. So what I mean is that the major focus first should be on the direct impacts of the GI system. Then it's an automatic effect somehow. When you have the GI established in the region, which affects the market potential and the sales volume, it can attract automatically the more tourists and visitors to the region due to the reputation that gained because of the GI product.
Thanks, Anas. That's a good suggestion for the way forward. Would there be any other comments? I can see there is a comment on the chat. I think we have to, time is almost up, but Charlene, there is actually a comment addressed to you regarding country branding, made in. So, you know, we all know this made in Switzerland, made in Germany. Would made in Zimbabwe be something that would be useful for the promotion of this coffee? So this goes a little bit out of the narrow context of distinctive science. It goes more into country branding. Did you have a chance to discuss that with the producers?
No, I did not have a chance to discuss that with the producers. But just from my observations around some of these campaigns, I think one of them is developing in Zimbabwe. There's a Buy Zimbabwe campaign that was being championed by Zimtrade. I'm not sure if they are thinking of taking it further to make it made in Zimbabwe or made in Switzerland, like what you have with others. I think the problem that I have with country branding is that there is no quite clear legal framework on how to preserve that. So it can be open to manipulation. It can be open to having counterfeit products because there is the framework that you have with the trademark, for instance, is quite solid. If there's a counterfeit, if there's a fraud, you can go to court, you can enforce your rights. Now with country branding, there doesn't seem to be anything solid as yet that protects that kind of distinction or differentiation. It could work as a tourism strategy, I think, to kind of bring in people on board. But in capturing consumers, I think it's a bit difficult to push at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, Christoph, we just have a comment or question from Sarkis. Sarkis is the head of the Africa Middle East Trademark Office Practice Committee at INTA. Sarkis, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the presentation. That was great. And Christoph, I had the same issue like you had, because I think from what I'm hearing now, it's probably the GIs should be the first step for promoting, because most of the farmers actually, they are not interested in branding. They are just cultivating and selling. So basically, the GI probably is the first step that you can protect the brand or the product, because certification and collective marks should come next. Usually certification, and then you have the collective marks. Because if you take an example, for example, if you don't have a GI for the coffee in Zimbabwe, anybody in the US can create a collective membership and start marketing it, but that won't be original, because that's not true, because they are not the one who's producing or doing it. So ideally, you should have a GI registration or protection. Then you can go into the certification where they can certify the product is actually coming from Zimbabwe. Then you can create a collective trademark for the membership. Otherwise, anybody in any country can create a collective membership or a certification mark, and that should be okay. But that won't be original or real, actually, not representing the actual products. So that was my comment, actually.
Thanks a lot, Sarkis. I think you're also referring to the important provision in the TRIPS agreement that says that GIs have to be protected at home first before you can actually do something. That I think is quite important. And I think in the case of Ethiopia, they had some negative experience on this. But I can see that time is up, unless there are any further questions or comments. Ted, would you like to have some final remarks?
I would like just to thank all of you for attending. It's really a pleasure, and we've been briefed by Sanaz, Charlene, and Natalia, who I think has disappeared. And no, it was really a pleasure. And let me also seize the opportunity to mention that later this year in November, we are going to have, our INTA first ever, virtual annual meeting. So we look forward, to have some of you, if not all of you, and that perhaps that will be also an opportunity, to carry on the discussion. So thanks so much. Thanks, Christoph. Thanks, Sana, Charlene, Natalia, and all of you. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much, Ted.
Thank you very much.
Also from my side, thanks to everyone. Thanks to Natalia, Charlene, Sanaz for these excellent presentations, and Ted, thanks for the good cooperation. And thanks to all of our participants. I hope you found it interesting, and we'll be happy to follow up on, after this webinar, on any questions you may have. So let me wish you a nice weekend. Stay healthy, stay safe, and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.